Sweet. Do we have an agenda? We don't have an agenda. We don't need an agenda, do we?
You technically had an agenda that was properly posted on the city website and outside the planning and zoning office. All it says on the agenda is a presentation and discussion on the draft zoning regulations and adjournment.
Do we have anyone? I don't think we have anyone else joining, right? It's just us nine.
No attendees.
Okay.
It's just you guys for now. So,
You want to
we can
lead us?
You want to? I mean, I guess we can be formal, and I'll take the roll if you want.
Oh, sure. Alexis, can we have a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Steve Clackey.
I'm here.
Cheryl Brown.
Here.
Heather Breslin.
Here.
Newest member, welcome.
Thank you.
Ed Holowenko. And Catherine Knight.
Here.
And Matt Pence. The voice, he's there.
Oh, there's the agenda. I finally dug it up. Hold on. Let's make this legit. Thanks, Alexis. I'm just going to go ahead and say, as an extension of the roll call, we can introduce Heather Breslin, who is my friend and colleague, who has lived in Norwalk a little longer than I have. How long have you lived in Norwalk?
11 years in total.
11 years in total, right. And who has education in planning, and actually does marketing for our company and does a great job of it. She's also man, what is a nice way to say this? Somebody who likes foraging and making random concoctions of questionable.
You're delicious.
Right. No, no, she's all into foraging, mushrooms and salves. I don't have my plantain salve with me right now, Heather. But we also have, I just picked up some elderberry flower syrup, right?
Yeah, elderberry. Yep.
Elderberry syrup. And so yeah, she's a crunchy like me in her own special way. And she also has a 5-year-old. He's 5 now, right?
Six.
Oh, he's 6 now? Okay.
I know. He's little. I know.
He and Dash are buddies.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that's as much as I'll share about Heather right now. Heather, would you like to?
No, thanks, Steve. That was helpful. I'm excited to be, part of the commission. I definitely have an interest in conservation, and just as Steve pointed out, in nature in general, including I am now as of COVID, a huge rock hound, which Alexis, I got to go into her office and I just was going nuts over all the rocks. So yeah, things took an interesting turn during COVID. I had a lot of different hobbies, but foraging was, and we didn't call it that when I was younger. We just, my grandpa would drop us off and we'd go collect stuff on the side of the road, but always been a part of my life. And, so I'm grateful to be here.
Cool. Well, we're grateful to have you.
Welcome aboard, Heather. Nice to have a new member.
Thank you.
I don't think we need to introduce everybody. You'll get a feel for who everyone is and our own respective ways to contribute to what we're doing.
Sounds good.
Cool. Okay. So next on the agenda, draft zoning regulations, presentation and discussion.
All right, so this evening we have Brian Baker. He is the principal planner for the city of Norwalk. And he's been an integral part of this exercise called the zoning regulation rewrite. And so thank you, Brian, for taking the time to come to the Conservation Commission meeting. I know that I've been out the last few days and you and I were going to meet and go over some of the things that the commission has talked about and we haven't. So go easy on Brian because he is prepared, but not as prepared as I would have liked him to be. Or I would have, you know what I mean? I think I'll be quiet now. And Brian, take it away.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'll start sharing my screen. All right. So we've been doing a lot of these kind of get-togethers with different community groups, different commissions, kind of just try to get the word out and get some feedback on the zoning regulation rewrite, which also includes rezoning the city. So they're kind of a hand-in-hand process. So we're getting into, now it's the first week of June. Starting June 21st and June 28th, the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to be holding a couple of public hearings to get some feedback from the public on what we've proposed. So it's good that we kind of get you guys a couple weeks heads up to kind of see where we're at right now in the process. So we'll kind of look at why we're rewriting the zoning regulations, and then kind of what are the big picture changes, and then we'll kind of focus in on what I went through as sort of more items pertaining to what the Conservation Commission is probably interested in most. So we'll kind of go into those near the end. So the first, let me just move everybody's faces out of the way so I can see my slides. So the first idea, or the first reason why we wanted to rewrite the regs is that it was specifically called out in the 2019 Plan of Conservation and Development as one of the goals for the city. And a big reason why that was a goal for the city is because the zoning regulations haven't been rewritten or really revisited and modified in any significant way in about 30 or 40 years. So they're, at this point, they're really dated. It's one long document full of text. It's really hard for a person who's not familiar with them to go into the zoning regulations and say, you know, if I'm a homeowner, where can I put a shed on my property? What are my setbacks? What do I have to worry about? The regulations will send you jumping from 4 different sections, and none of the sections sort of tell you that you're supposed to also go look here or also go look at this section. So it's really confusing, convoluted, and difficult to understand. So hopefully what we are trying to achieve is also by taking all the different zones in Norwalk and kind of trying to simplify and reduce how many we have. So today there's 31 different zones. There's 5 different single family zones. And what we've come up with is a way to reduce that down to what it will eventually hopefully be 14 zones. So pretty much cutting it in half. And then we'll have these overlay zones for specific areas. And what overlay zones are is sort of additional protections or requirements on top of the underlying zoning. So you can think of areas in the city like the north part of East Avenue, which is the East Avenue Village District. So if you wanted to do some sort of development in the East Avenue Village District, there's some additional standards that you have to comply with, just based on sort of the unique character of that particular part of the city. And again, hopefully a big goal is that these regulations are easier to look at and will make it easier for our department to regulate going forward. So there's lots of pictures and graphs and charts and tables and a lot of good visual elements that we've included in the regulations that we hope make it easier for everybody to understand. So here's a map of the existing zoning regulations in Norwalk. The purpose of this slide is to show you that it's confusing. It's kind of one big jumbled mess. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see this is a part of Main Ave, but you can see you go from the business 2 zone, which is this blue color. You can come down a side street and then you'll end up in a neighborhood business zone, and then go through a residential zone, and then you can go up and end up in an industrial zone. So there's really no like kind of, I guess, like pattern to the development. It doesn't go from like a most intense core to a less intense outer core, and then less intense as you sort of move away from there. So that's kind of one of the things that we are thinking about hopefully achieving with the proposed regulations. So we wanted to align how the zoning districts sort of look with the comprehensive plan of the city and the plan of conservation and development. How we do that is we kind of use, there's a map within the POCD called the future land use map, kind of becomes a rough guide for sort of how we want to lay the zoning out in the city, sort of like the actual specific zones. And then what we wanted to do is concentrate our development near our mass transit areas, near our infrastructure, meaning where do we have public water, where do we have sewer, what are the kind of major road networks that we have, and then near employment centers. So for example, Norwalk Hospital is a really good example. We want to hopefully have some development occur near the hospital so folks who work there can live by it, walk to it, and have some other sort of places that they can walk to. And then lastly, it's going to be sort of this a hybrid zoning code. So what a hybrid zoning code is what our zoning is right now. It's called Euclidean zoning. It's very, you can do this use here and you can do this use here, sort of breaks everything up based on use. Then there's form-based zone, which is kind of more of a newer concept, which is more looking at the built environment. So we're kind of more interested in regulating how buildings look and sort of looking at it from a pedestrian standpoint, and a little bit less on the use that occurs within the building. We're still worried about the use that occurs in the building, but a little bit less so, kind of more on the actual look and feel of a structure. And what a hybrid does is it takes both of those concepts and merges them together. So for example, the single family zones that we propose to have will not be form-based, meaning if you want to build a single family house, we're not going to tell you what it can and can't look like. But if you wanted to do a multifamily development in the center of the city, we are going to tell you kind of what we want the building to look like. So here's a map of the sort of areas in Norwalk where we're focusing our development on. So you can see the little train icons, those represent our mass transit areas. So really it's the Merritt Station train station, the Sono Station, South Norwalk train station, and then the East Norwalk train station. So those are really our three major mass transit facilities. The yellow line that runs east to west throughout the city is Route 1. So that's a major corridor throughout the city. The little heart icon there is Norwalk Hospital. So we want to focus some development around there as a major employer. And then you see little briefcases, the West Ave Wall Street area. So there's a lot of jobs, restaurants, little shops in there. So another corridor where we wanted to focus our development. Another major goal is to sort of address kind of the major issues that we're dealing with right now as a city. So one of the biggest ones is sort of the housing crisis. We've seen house prices skyrocket, which makes it hard for younger folks to be able to afford a house in Norwalk. It makes it hard for people who live in Norwalk today to continue to be able to afford to live in Norwalk. And then also the older folks who are on fixed incomes, it's hard for them to also stay. So as these housing prices keep climbing, people are getting priced out. And what that results in is people moving further and further away from Norwalk. So you might have, a lot of folks who are your teachers and your nurses, sort of like your vital, employees in the city, and they have to live elsewhere, which contributes to, they have to drive to work, which adds traffic, which adds carbon emissions, which is all sort of bad stuff that we're trying to avoid. Home ownership is one that we're trying to address, hopefully with expansion of sort of some home ownership opportunities, which we think we can accomplish through expanding some two-family housing opportunities. If, a single family house right now in Norwalk costs anywhere between, on average, $450,000 to $550,000. Two-family houses are generally a bit cheaper. And so what that allows is for somebody who might not have that money for a down payment for $500,000, maybe they can afford a down payment on a two-family portion of a unit, unit within a two-family structure that might cost $300,000. Climate change is another big issue that we're hoping to address with the zoning regulations. Obviously, we're very concerned about sea level rise and how that's going to impact Norwalk. So we're hoping that within the regulations, we have some protections for flood regulations and some flexibility for the folks who are living in flood zones. We want to improve the permitting process to kind of make it a little bit more straightforward for folks who come in and get a permit. It's difficult for, a homeowner to come in trying to figure out what they want to do on their property. And then we as staff also have to, look at the application and say, well, do we actually permit this? Like it just, it's not good for a homeowner. It's not good for us as staff to kind of struggle in reading our existing regulations. So we hope that the new regulations kind of streamline the permitting process for everybody. And then tackling the public and private responsibilities. A lot of the times what this is mostly focused on is for a developer who comes in and they want to build something in the city, we want to be upfront about what we expect the developer to provide the city. So it's new sidewalks, it's street trees, it's new utilities installed, the electrical should go underground, kind of those kind of concepts. So those aren't really in our regulations today. So we want to put those in our regulations so that everybody kind of knows what we expect. So again, I think I discussed this a little bit, but the idea of a hybrid code, it takes the Euclidean zoning concept of separating uses with the form-based concept of regulating sort of what a structure looks like and combining those into one single code. So again, the single family areas will still kind of be that Euclidean zoning, and our more mixed use areas will go under the form-based zoning. And then adding lots of graphics and tables and visuals for folks to make it easier to understand. So this is sort of this transect that is like a national, adopted nationally as a form-based concept. So what they sort of do is they break up land into these 5 different transects. So kind of the most important part to focus on are these numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they do special districts. So 1 is sort of like untouched natural land. 2 is more of a rural. So that's when you kind of you might have a farm. You might have like 1 house per every 10 acres. You get to 3, which is more of a suburban area, which is sort of where you start to get into Norwalk, where you get on the outskirts of Norwalk, like West Norwalk, Cranberry. That's more of your CD3, where you might have 1 house for every acre. You get to 4, which is like a general urban. This is as you're starting to get towards the core of Norwalk. You're going to start seeing some small multifamily houses, some small retail, corner stores, those kind of things. And then you'll get to the number 5, which is your downtown. So that's your Sono up through Wall Street sort of area. CD is just a sort of our adopted nomenclature for these areas. So these CD could be anything, like any town could take the letters and do kind of whatever they want. We took CD, and what that just means is community district. So this is a excerpt of what the proposed zoning regulations sort of look like. So this is a single family zone. So what you see is CD, so community district. 3 is that transect we just looked like, so suburban. And S means small lot. So a small lot in terms of these regulations, meaning a lot that needs 100 feet of frontage. So 100 feet of street frontage for a lot. As you can see, there's lots of graphics. It's telling you on the right-hand side, here's where you can build a structure. It's telling you what your front setback is, what your side setback is, what your rear setback is for your principal structure. And then it does the same kind of concept for your sheds, garages, pools, those kind of things. Again, same kind of concept, except this is a mixed use zone. So we see the CD, the community district 4, so more of a mixed use area, and then the W stands for water. So this is when you have a smaller multifamily mixed use zone that's near the water. It's going to tell you sort of, again, where you can build structures. It's going to tell you what your setbacks are. And in this case, you'll actually have maximum setbacks. And then as you go through the regs, it'll tell you sort of what your maximum heights are and all those kind of things, what the density can be. And those are all kind of spelled out in the regulations. This is a new addition. It's not a new concept, but it's new to our regulations. And I think something that is really important. It's a use table. So pretty much when you go into the proposed regulations, there will be a multi-page use table where it lists all of the zones at the top, and then all of the uses that we have in the city. And it tells you if it's not permitted, a special permit use, permitted with limitations, or just permitted as of right. So it breaks them all down and it tells you, yes, you can build it, no, you can build it, and maybe you can build it. There's just some more information that you might have to look into. And all of these uses, what's additionally good about this is all of these uses have definitions. So if you don't know what a dormitory is, the regulation actually defines it. Whereas today, there are specific uses in our regs that don't have definitions. So if you come in and say, I want to do this, we have to say, well, what actually is that? So that's not good for anybody. So being more specific and less discretionary is better. These are sort of building types. So this is as you get into that form-based concept on what a building is supposed to look like. This will sort of say, like, this is what we expect a townhouse to look like. This is where you can build a townhouse. This is what a small multifamily building looks like. And these are the zones where you can build a small multifamily building. And each of these, I think in the next few slides, like, for example, this might not be the best one, but here's a good one. They tell you sort of like the materials that the structure needs to be made of. They tell you sort of the amount of windows you need to have, the type of frontages that the structure needs to have. So it gets really specific onto kind of what the building has to look like for it to get built in that zone. And the only reason why I skipped over this previous slide was it shows a couple of single family houses. So like, for an example, this is a house, and then they call this a estate house, which is just broken up based on the size. But if you're in a single family zone and you're building a house, you're not sort of regulated to, you're not told what kind of materials you can use or what kind of roof you can have on your structure. So these are kind of some of the big picture changes that we're making as part of the regulation rewrite. So the AAA area, which is a single family zone, it's a minimum lot size of 1 acre. It's mostly located on the outskirts of Norwalk. So again, your West Norwalk area, Cranberry area, Wilson Point, those are your AAA areas. There's really not much change being proposed to those. And really the idea is that they're not on city water, they're not on sewer, they're mostly septic and well. So, it doesn't make sense to us to sort of have additional development there since there's no real infrastructure or utilities going out to those areas. Really the only change for them is the name of the zone. So it goes from AAA to CD3L. So the L stands for large lot. One of the more, this is a bigger change, is consolidating the single family zones down. So we have a AA zone and an A zone. Those zones are very similar today. Really the biggest difference between the two is a AA has a minimum lot size of 1/2 acre and A has a minimum lot size of 1/4 acre. Other than that, they have the same front setbacks. They have very similar side setbacks and rear setbacks. So we propose to merge those together, and that'll include a bunch of B zone areas as well. B zones are even smaller than AA or A. They're a minimum lot size of 6,250 square feet. So areas where that got consolidated into that zone were kind of as areas where you're getting away from your core center of the city and moving more in towards that single family zone area. So so some of those B zones got picked up into that zone. Another big change was for those B zone areas that were closer to the center of the city, they got consolidated in with the C residence zones. The big change there means that the B residence zone that existed prior can now allow for 2-family houses. So in our opinion, it's those areas that we've kind of went through based on where they are closer to the center of the city. They're more walkable. They already allow for ADUs just like every other single family zone in the city. So you can already kind of do 2 units on your property. So a duplex just kind of adds that potential for a 2-unit, 2 owner occupied unit structure to be built. The duplexes or the two families will have some form-based requirements, so they'll actually have to, kind of tell folks who are looking to build them kind of how they have to look, kind of hoping to avoid that sort of just boxy duplex look that I think some folks are not really wanting to see in the city. And again, just the focus on the home ownership opportunities. If you build a single family house with an ADU, it's beneficial, but really only one person can own the lot. So the property owner has to live in either the house or the ADU. It doesn't give another person an opportunity to actually physically own and build equity in a unit. A consolidation of our urban core. So this is stretching from the South Norwalk train station up through Wall Street. Right now, there's 6 different zones in that stretch, and they all kind of try to do the same kind of thing. They want more mixed use developments. They're a little bit taller. 6 stories generally is the height. And again, it's kind of where you want to have your multifamily buildings, your restaurants, your retail. And so we said, why do you need 6 separate zones to kind of try to accomplish the same thing? We can do it with one zone, and that kind of gives a more uniform development pattern throughout that whole stretch.
Hey, Brian, can I interject for a second?
Sure.
Just for the sake of time, would you mind just trying to keep your Conservation Commission shades on as you go through these slides, because I think there's other opportunities for people to get the whole story. I think let's just try to focus primarily on the stuff that we think is going to affect concerns that Conservation Commission has in mind.
You got it.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Let me jump forward to your guys' stuff.
There you go.
All right. So conservation wise, I think one of the big changes that we've added are these requirements that if you're looking to do a lot of grading or excavation or clear cutting on your property, now you actually have to come in and get permits for it. So today, the regulations really don't speak to this concept. So now if you're looking to like clear cut a lot, you'd have to come in and get permits through whether it be a zoning permit or whether it be a special permit based on the size of the disturbance that you're creating. So kind of one of the things that we always hear about is how can we prevent, when these new developments come in, them from clear cutting a whole lot, and then we lose all of this existing tree coverage. So this is something that we think is really important and can prevent some of that from happening. And also what it requires is that they actually come up with a plan for what trees that they're removing to actually replace. And they actually have to replace them with native species, which we think I don't think is currently in our zoning regulations, but it's something that we've added in, which is definitely beneficial. So again, this kind of just goes in through excavating and filling, and how the existing regulations really don't speak to it much. They give exemptions for if you pull a building permit, you're exempted from pretty much our excavation and fill permits. That will no longer be the case based on the size of the disturbance. Grading, this comes up a lot when a new lot gets developed. What happens is they either add in a bunch of fill, or they do what's cut grading. So they remove a lot of fill, they excavate a lot, and what this causes a lot of drainage issues for property owners that abut that property. So they get a lot of runoff from rain events, and it floods out their property, and there's really nothing that the current regulations do to prevent that from happening. So these regulations propose to actually put maximum sort of grade changes that you could do, especially within your setbacks. And kind of the idea is that with these, you'll no longer be able to build up your house on like a podium of fill and flood your neighbors. So, that's definitely a big quality of life issue that we think gets addressed with these regulations. This goes into the sustainability kind of incorporations in the regulations. So one of the big one is impervious surface maximums. The regs today only have a max building coverage, meaning we just say how much of your lot you can cover with a building. It doesn't account for any of the other impervious surfaces that can be on your lot, like your driveways and patios and things like that. So we are going to transition to impervious surface. So any impervious surface on your lot will get incorporated into sort of have a maximum amount that you can do. So again, that prevents people from being able to pave their entire lots, which we cannot prevent today. There's green roofs and solar panel requirements on some of our larger developments. If any lot or any structure with an area more than 25,000 square feet will need to cover at least 25% of that area with a green roof or solar panels. If any of you are familiar with the Wegmans development, they came in and we wanted them to put solar panels on their proposed parking garage. There was nothing like that we could hold them to require that, other than that they were asking for a special permit. We're really happy that they agreed to do it, but that was something that there was no specific reg that we could point to say you have to do this. So now that's actually going to be incorporated in the regulations. Then we have shading of south-facing windows. That's kind of to prevent in the summer when it gets really hot. That's to prevent you from having to turn on your air conditioning unit. It's just kind of a natural way to keep your house cool. I just touched on this is the private landscaping requirements. This is for larger developments that go to the commission. They'll actually have to give planting plans and include native plantings as part of that planting plan. And then maximum parking requirements. So you can't have more than 10% above the minimum number of parking spaces required. So this will cut down on hopefully the amount of impervious surface that goes onto a lot. And it can also cut down on the amount of leniency or the ability we really give to people to give incentives for people to drive, and might actually do the opposite and say, if you have a maximum number of parking spaces, maybe it will kind of move away from that you must drive here kind of idea.
Hey, Brian, two questions real quick on that last slide. One,
Yeah.
little naive. The rain barrels, what exactly are rain barrels and what's the purpose of them?
So they just collect water. Essentially, you hook them up to your downspout and they collect water, and you can use that water to sort of irrigate your landscaping throughout a given period of time.
Okay, so there's a reuse component to it. It's not just collecting water, it's repurposing.
Right.
And then do you know, like right now for that maximum parking requirements, like what are were there standards in place in the old regs? Like what are, what's out there? What does the city have?
So what I'll do, I'll point again to Wegmans. So right now, a grocery store is parked at one parking space for every 200 square feet of active area. Wegmans said, that's awesome, we're going to double it. So rather than have 300 parking spaces, they came up and said we want 600 parking spaces. And there's nothing that we can say no, you can't do that much parking. So now we're actually going to have a reg to say you can't do that much parking.
But that's 10%, right? That caps it. Is there a standard out there? Are there any statistics? I'm just curious.
As far as like what to cap it at?
Like where we are right now, like what previous developments have really done. I mean, I guess you're saying it was unlimited, but what are they up against right now?
So I think most developments that we see, it kind of ranges. So some developers will park it at the minimum. A lot of them actually do that. They park it at the minimum. So this is just really a protective measure to prevent folks from sort of over parking their developments, especially if we're seeing developments in areas where we want it to be more walkable. And then they're using more of their lot to be a parking lot than they are to, be green space, open space, or, provide something a little bit more beneficial to the city than private parking.
So Brian, generally the existing regulations have parking standards for the number of parking spaces required depending on what's being proposed, and that's not really going to change too much, right?
Right. So the minimum standards generally stay the same. So you still have to have a minimum number of parking spaces based on the parking calculations that are in the regs. This is just kind of saying you can't over park it, but you do have to come up with a minimum required.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Yeah. And I think that was it. at least for my presentation, I could go over next steps. So again, June 21st and June 28th, we're doing a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission. Then after those couple of meetings, they're not looking at adopting anything at those meetings. It's just really to get public input. Throughout July and August, we'll sort of take those comments, make tweaks to the regulations based on those comments. And then hopefully by the end of September, or early October, we'll actually hold some hearings to hopefully make some adoption of the regulations in the map, and then set like an effective date for like January 1, 2024. And that's it for my presentation.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Is anybody sitting on any questions that they want to ask before? I've got some direction I'd like to go in the conversation for us specifically, but anybody want to ask something first?
I'm just curious.
I mean, I have, oh, sorry.
All right, so it's gonna be Matt. I think Catherine had hand up before you, Cheryl, so we'll
Yep.
do Matt, then Catherine, then Cheryl.
Okay, I know you showed a map of the existing zoning. Is there a map of the proposed? Did I miss that?
Yeah, you want me to go through that or just take like a peek?
I'm just curious. Yeah, just to peek at it.
Yeah. All right. So this was, let me see if hopefully that's the whole screen. So you can see this on our website, the Planning and Zoning website. This is all up there. We proposed some tweaks, which were actually, after this meeting, I'm hopping over to the Planning and Zoning Commission to kind of go over what those changes were. So you're kind of getting the first actual preview of some updated changes that we've proposed, which are highlighted in red. So what you'll see is, I'll zoom out a bit. The yellow areas are really your single family areas. Orange is the 2-family, and then the pink is that CD4, so small multifamily, small commercial, and purple is your denser core. Red is Route 1 Main Avenue. So those are kind of a little bit denser than, not as dense as the purple, but denser than the pink.
And there's links to that, Matt, on the main zoning rewrite page.
Okay, that's great. Appreciate it.
Catherine?
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I just had a few questions. One was just understanding some of the overlay zone regulation changes, because I think that also is something of interest to the Conservation Commission, is on like the flood and the coastal area management. And what are the changes in zoning regulations there? And also one thing to flag is just on the subdivisions. So we've seen a lot of issues where we've been compromised in trying to protect wetlands because of larger properties being subdivided, and the wetlands are kind of hived off onto one property. So it's very difficult within the upland review area to maintain the integrity of what, is intended to be protected.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, the overlays, I guess there's two different kinds. There's like a design standard overlays, and then there's like the ones you mentioned, like the coastal area management overlay, and then the flood zone overlay. There's really not much change to the coastal area management one, since that's kind of regulated through state statute. Some of the bigger changes that we made to the flood zone ones are changing sort of how we calculate improvements to buildings that are in flood zones. So today we probably have the most restrictive flood zone regulations in the state. We look back to when the flood zones were first adopted, which I think is 1978. And we look at all of the improvements you've made to your house since it became non-flood compliant, and we sort of count that against you. Meaning, if you want to do a renovation to your house and it's in the flood zone, and you've done historically more than 50% of the value of 50% of the work to the value of, it's hard to explain. So it's the 50% worth
The
of
value of your
renovations,
house.
right, to the value of your house. You have to actually raise your house. We're going to say you can't renovate your bathroom. You actually have to make your house flood compliant. So the change that we're proposing is we're going to do a 10-year look back period. So we'll look back 10 years and see how much work you've done to your house. And then we're going to let you do 25% of the 25% worth of work as compared to the value of your house. So what that does is it starts creating this reset period every 10 years where you're allowed to do that 25% worth of work to your home. So you can do those smaller projects like renovate your kitchen, put a new roof on your house, redo your siding. And it's really not there to like let you put a big addition on your house, because at that point, we're going to say you should probably make your house flood compliant if it's not already. So that's really the biggest change to the flood zone regs.
And what section is that in?
Article 6.
Article
I
6.
can say, yeah, I think it's, I don't have the subsection at 6.11 or something
That's
like.
okay. That's fine.
Yeah, Alexis, I sent you some reviews just recently. I was looking at Madison, Connecticut, and they were looking at doing a lot more on their zoning specifically for coastal area management in terms of really putting in to protect the state statutes on the upland review areas and what can and can't go on in those zones.
Okay,
So,
I just saw that.
so they have been working on that because it's a really sensitive area that does need protection.
So are you saying that the more aggressive regulation on the coastal areas is extending inward to the waterways that feed the coast? Is that what you're getting at? I'm not following entirely.
No, I'm saying that they have upland review areas of things and activities that are excluded from development, like sheds or looking at the impervious surface areas and coastal tidal wetland areas.
Okay.
The 100 feet in terms of development, like no new development, no building of sheds, the impervious surface coverage, going quite extensive.
Got it. Okay.
We'll have a look.
Ms. Brown?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could delve into the tree replacement in the regulations and give us a little more information on that, like when, a site is being cleared and what the tree, replacement plan is for different areas.
Yeah, so that's also, I believe it's included in Article 6. That's kind of where you get into all those special standards. So it's mostly for, when we see developments that go to the commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they're submitting landscaping plans, or they're submitting soil and erosion plans that show that they're going to be clearing a good majority of the lot in order to build their building. So as part of that, they actually have to give us a soil and erosion and control plan, and then they have to give us a planting plan. And within that planting plan, they have to show us the number of trees that they're proposing to replace whatever they're removing with. And based on that, they have to be native species plantings, and then they have to have a variety of them based on the number of trees that they have to replace. So they can't just do one tree that they're going to, completely replace across the board. It has to have a variety to it. That's really the biggest change. Other than that, the existing regs have nothing that really speak to kind of how specific or when you actually have to replace trees. You can kind of clear cut a lot, and then there's nothing to say you have to provide any sort of replacement tree coverage.
And I mean, are you dictating the size of the trees, or is there like a replacement ratio, like, based on the size of the trees being removed?
I'll double check if there's a ratio. I was doing a quick read of it. I was trying to come up with things that you guys were going to be focused on. I don't remember recalling a ratio, but I will double check to see if there's a ratio of trees and get you an answer on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think originally there was a bit more about tree replacement, and then the amount of work needed to enforce something like that was looked at and reconsidered. And I think Brian's earlier slide about grading and disturbance, grading includes clear cutting. So clear cutting more than 5,000 square feet would need now a zoning permit. So it's right now the zoning regulations have nothing. And I'd say that these definitely focus on the let's try to hem in additional clearing without kind of regulatory oversight, as opposed to kind of a per tree attempt throughout the city. And that just comes back down to the amount of human resources.
Catherine?
Hi, yeah, I just have a question, just going back to the coastal management, because when you look at the Coastal Management Act for the state of Connecticut, section 22A-103, subsection C, it says in revising zoning regulations under chapter 124 for the area within the coastal boundary, the municipal zoning commissions may utilize any lawful zoning techniques, including but not limited to modifications of use categories, alteration of density, intensity of use, special use zones, overlay zones, special permit regulations, sign controls, design controls, landscaping, and gardening regulations, hazard geological review requirements, conservation cluster, goes on about, in incentive zoning regulations. So I'm not clear, in looking at it, why Norwalk feels that municipalities don't have authority under the Coastal Management Act to have coastal area management zoning regs.
Yeah, we do have coastal area management regs. It's just, it's really like a carryover from the existing regulations. So like we have a coastal area management zone. So like if you're in that zone, there's those additional standards, in which case you go to the statute and you apply those additional protections to the tidal wetlands and all those kind of coastal resources. We do consider those as part of when developments occur in the coastal area management zone. There's those protections added to, we don't want uses that are going to negatively impact the coast, so those uses aren't permitted in those areas. There's that CD4W zone, which is located near the water, but it's a much lower intensity much lower density of use when compared to like the CD5. It maxes out at like a 2.5-story structure with 6 units within that structure. So and the impervious surface coverages are lower. There's concepts like water dependent uses being required as part of those developments. So all of those are kind of sort of taken into consideration. But sort of if there's anything that we could do further, I don't think it hurts to kind of point those out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there needs to be similar things about, the tree removals, especially because we've seen subdivisions happening in the residential zones. And basically the lots that are really on the tidal wetlands have been clear cutted, and the landscaping, the use of Roundup and other pesticides that go straight right into, the tidal wetland area is problematic. So it would be appreciated if we could look at that and maybe look at, vis-a-vis like what Westport and some of the other coastal communities have done in updating and being a little bit more in line with what we do currently to protect the inland wetlands.
Right,
Because
and
I don't
so
know that we're as protective of the tidal wetlands.
right. I just wanted to add that the coastal area management section has been reworded to make it more clear what the Coastal Management Act requires, and clarifies some of the application requirements that may be required, such as an environmental review. And then the exemptions, like you were talking about, the way that it is currently structured, there's a fair amount that for example, a single family homeowner can do if they're waterfront once the house is built. And with the new language, we will, I think, potentially have many more coastal area site plan reviews coming to the commission, because it does require more review if work is within 50 feet of coastal resources. So right now if you're within 100 feet of a coastal resource, you potentially need to go to the commission, and the new regulations will have that requirement triggered now if you're within 50 feet of certain coastal resources. But we'll look
Okay.
over Madison too.
Okay. All right, well, all right, so we have Alexis for 7 more minutes. How many more minutes do we have you, Brian?
However many you need.
Oh,
And Amelia's here too.
and Amelia, we got Amelia too. Okay. So I wasn't sure whether to ask this question before or after, but obviously I decided to ask it after. What are the Conservation Commission's priorities? Rhetorical question. Well, no, it is a real question. I mean, unmute yourselves, chime in. What are our priorities? Everybody got chicken all of a sudden.
I think the conservation, obviously, of wetlands, maybe, I'm not quite clear where the city's thinking about for open space or how that impacts on, zoning areas as to where is it likely to be that we're going to source open space or grow open space, because we've lost a lot of open space over the past 15 years.
Okay,
Vis-a-vis
So-
Connecticut's 21% open space goals.
okay. So open space, coastal, water management. We've talked about trees. I think, but what is the underlying? So the underlying element or whatever to a lot of what I've written down is, I think, water management, which, for example, trees affect whatnot. I would say, to a certain degree, we didn't really talk about a whole lot, but heat island effect, which does, I think, have a greater, it links to what we're worried about with water management, which is kind of like the underlying wetland concern, but also starts tying in, people and animals and whatnot a little more, and also like the big picture. Does anybody else have thoughts on heat island effect, or am I own on that? And does anybody not know what heat island effect means? Or I can give a quick blurb about it.
Well, I agree with Heat Island, definitely.
Okay.
And I think, the regulations look, it seems like, adding the green roofs and stuff like that is like really a great, nod to that, to trying to prevent that. And also, water, water reuse and flooding as well. But I would agree.
Okay. So, and okay. Anybody else? Am I stirring anything up for anyone else, or I'll
One,
keep
I don't know if it's conservation, but in Connecticut's aspirations for the role of EV, electric vehicles, I don't know how that fits in with some of the zoning, because right now there's place markers for development to put in EV chargers. But, if you're thinking about the multifamily, a lot of those are rental situations. And so it's challenging for people to then kind of put in chargers, or how that's going to work within the city to meet the fleet requirements and the electricity requirements of these cars and transportation.
Well, and I definitely have seen how zoning can be leveraged to help spread infrastructure for PVs. Heather.
Sorry, I muted myself. I don't usually do that. At the risk of being the new person here and saying something silly.
Oh, I say things silly all the time. And how long have I been on the commission?
Just wondering about sort of wildlife, attention to like wildlife corridor management, that type of thing that would be affected by the zoning. I'm not sure what is current or where it's addressed, or if it's not addressed. And also, I don't know, Alexis, I had said this to you before, but any changes to projected water use that this zoning, as well as other infrastructure, but is a less of, I'll bring those concerns or thoughts to the public meeting or whatever. But just as far as like projected impacts,
So how will these zoning regulations affect, for example, how much stormwater our sewer system is
Yeah,
going to have to handle?
exactly. Or how much, if the density is changing at all, the demand for water, any of that.
Well, and then also knowing the way our water removal, whatever, what's the right term, zoning guy and gal, water, after it's been used? Treatment? Whatever,
Wastewater treatment plant?
wastewater treatment, I mean,
Right.
like, correct me if I'm wrong, but does our storm sewer and sanitary sewer get treated by the same system? No, they're separate now? Can't hear you, Alexis.
No, no, so your stormwater system, I can try to extract the word sewer from stormwater management systems because there is zero treatment for stormwater systems. And so your sanitary goes to the
plant.
wastewater pollution control facility, and a little bit of stormwater still goes there, but we're working on disconnecting all of those.
Awesome. Okay, so basically any water that hits the surface in our town, hits the ground or a building
Mhm.
that doesn't go into the ground, goes into the sound. Ha, that's got a ring
Or
to
a
it.
rain barrel.
That's right. If it's on the ground, it's in the sound.
There you go. Right, okay, all right, so that could have, potentially big impacts.
Definitely.
Conservation, big umbrella, which also I was curious, Brian, in that section 611 summary I was looking at, like 25% of the roof area, I think is a little weak. I mean, I know in New York City for Heat Island, at least you have to have 100%, any roof replacement has to be either white or solar panels.
Yeah, I
And
think,
you know what? They do it. You know what I mean?
yeah, I think white is very easy to do. That's it's very easy concept. The only thing that we always run into that comes up with solar panels is if they have other mechanicals up on the roof, then they
Right.
kind of complain, well, we can't do the whole thing, but maybe it's like 100% of the usable area up there.
That calculation does exclude mechanicals.
Okay.
So if you have 1,000 square foot roof and 100 square foot of his mechanicals, you actually only have a 900 square foot roof.
Gotcha.
I think they have a green roof. It's green roof or solar, right? Or is it not
Oh,
anymore?
I'm sorry, you're right. Well, no, actually, you're right. What is it, Heather? Is it every roof
One
has
of
to
the
be
local
white?
law
Yeah, look, which local law is it?
94, I think.
Okay. So it
93.
has to be green or has to be PV if it's not
Yep.
white. Is that it? Something to that effect?
There
Okay,
was the words
Brian.
green roof in there. I know that much.
Okay. So I think, Brian, those are the options in New York, and I could try to do the homework for you, but that would be making a promise that I can't keep. But I have a feeling that we can get something. I think it'd be pretty easy to find language to steal. that
Yeah, we
says-
actually are working on setting up like a roundtable with some sustainability experts to come in, hopefully at the end of June, to kind of talk with the Planning and Zoning Commission. And one of the people we flagged was some folks at New York Planning, or New York City Planning. So that
Good.
might answer our questions too.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we live in the vicinity of a jurisdiction that is leading the country in a lot of ways, and as far as buildings and cities go, wait, that's the biggest city in the country, so whatever. Okay, cool. All right, so I thought that was something that could really be like easily, with very few people screaming, turn the dial up on that quite a bit. And then, water retention. It says all new construction of 25,000 square feet or greater. And is that all new construction? Buildings? Is it a sidewalk? Is it a parking garage? What is it? 25,000 square feet of what? Must include stormwater management strategies. How much of the stormwater needs to be managed, right? Are they going to put in a 4 square foot, like gravel pit with a little, plant coming out of it and call that checking the box? I think and maybe there's more language. I'm sure there's more specific language in the actual regulations than in the summary document, but maybe that's a question instead of a statement.
No, I'll look at that. I'll see if there actually is more specific language, and then actually put a come up with some minimum actual requirements if it's not there.
Okay. And now, is there anything anywhere about like, how much, like, if I want to take a downspout from my house, put it on my driveway drains into the street. Is there language in there now? Was there language in there previously about that type of thing?
Nothing in there previously. Generally, most of the time, if you're dealing with some sort of like new construction similar to that, I mean, this is not really 100% matching up with what you're describing, but like if you're like looking at adding impervious surface to your lot, DPW looks at it and make sure it complies with our drainage manual.
No,
Mm.
I would just be like, you know, I have a wet basement and I want to extend my downspout to the sidewalk instead of my yard because I think that's going to help. And then that water goes elsewhere. It goes into another property or it goes into the sound, right? So is there anything in there about that?
Not that jumps out to mind.
And is there, so, and as far as the permeable surface area goes, so we've got a limit on, you can have 25%, let's just say in your CD3 zone, you can have 25% of your lot area impermeable. Is there any reason to add a caret in there that says, hey, you can cover more of your lot if you actively have, you know, rain swale, cistern, Is that like the level of complication you guys are interested in considering?
So I guess it depends on like what that person's looking. So if they want to do like a new development in that zone, what is there for us to incentivize? It might be tricky with like the CD3 zone because it's like you're maxed out at like a 2-family.
Right.
So there's like, but maybe if you get into that mixed use zone where we're like, you can do 1 unit per every 1650 of lot area, except
Mhm.
maybe if you do all of these sort of green infrastructure improvements, and we'll have like minimum standards, maybe you can do, you know, something in addition to it. Or maybe we'll let you cut down parking or, you know, something that might save them some money.
Right. Well, I was just looking up, I think it's in New York too, Heather. I don't know if you know this one or not, but you can bump up that number. Let's say ours is 1650, right? You can bump that up if you are increasing the wall thickness to accommodate more insulation, you know, things like that. Like in New York City, I mean, they count every square inch, right? Maybe it doesn't make sense in Norwalk, Connecticut, but you know, like I love the rules, but also I like getting people excited about doing the right thing too, right? You know, carrot sticks, blah, blah, blah. But
Mhm.
I don't know. Has anybody heard of anything like that? Or is that just like pie in the sky? Anyway, that's okay. All right, you're still here, Alexis. I'm not trying to get rid of you, but well, we can't hear you, so
Still can't hear you, Alexis.
Sorry, I'm slightly feverish, so I'm like, what?
Oh.
They have a public hearing first on their agenda. So
Ah.
I know that my item is not first, so.
Okay,
um,
cool.
At about 7-ish.
Well, we know how public hearings can go, so.
All good.
Okay.
Keep rolling with your conversation.
But anybody, but I'm just curious, Brian, what's the difference between an ordinance and the regulations?
So ordinances are more of like what your common council comes up with. So those are more of like your plastic bag bans and your what they're working with, like the leaf blower kind of ordinances to prevent people from doing it anywhere. So these zoning regulations are more specific to what you can develop on a private property.
Land use.
Yeah, it's more specific towards those kind of ideas.
Okay, so if we wanted to consider requiring a green building program or a green development program, such as the International Green Construction Code, in the residential world, it's known as NGBS, National Green Building Standard, which addresses energy use, water use, you know, density, et cetera. I'm just wondering if it makes sense to even try to include it in the regulations or to go the route of the ordinance, because
Yeah,
it's not exactly land use.
Yeah, what jumps out to me is sort of how ordinances should work, or sort of it should sort of set out goals for the city, and then you take your rules like your zoning regulations and apply those to meet those goals. So that kind of makes sense. Like it would be, you would adopt that as an ordinance because it would impact what the zoning regulation should say, and it should impact what your building code should say. So it would kind of encompass a bunch of different departments and codes, and we can all sort of develop our rules to meet those goals.
Okay, so we don't want the regulation to get in the way of future ordinances, for example.
Right.
Okay. Because I'm also just thinking, I'm like, I love the sustainability section, but no offense, but it's a little bit of greenwashing to me. I think it's checking a box, like, oh, we're doing
Yep.
something green.
And we have a couple commissioners on planning and zoning who are really into like the sustainability stuff, and they've said the same kind of stuff. So I'm imagining that that section's probably going to see some bulking up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Groovy.
But it definitely helps if you guys have like recommendations and put it into writing, and then that way that all kind of gets incorporated into the considerations.
All right, I'll start typing. I'm all ears, commissioners. You wimps.
Well, back to the heat island, was there any consideration, something that I brought up at the last meeting was adding a requirement for shade trees to be planted in parking lots? You know, I know that Westport has a regulation regarding that. It's something like for every 7 spots, you need to have 1 tree. They also require like street trees to be planted as well, like every 50 feet. Has that been considered to be added to the regulations?
Yes, we have street tree requirements in there. So
Okay.
any new development that comes in, they have to do street trees.
Okay.
There's another big one that hopefully cuts down on it is especially when you're like in the core of like South Norwalk or going up towards Wall Street, is giving like parking reductions, trying to reduce the amount of impervious surface in the area, which adds on to that heat island effect. I think there are standards for minimum number of trees in a parking lot. I know we have them in our regs today, so I would imagine if anything that they were at least carried over, if not strengthened. I'm just not sure of the specifics on what they were.
All
But
right,
if
so
not,
we say, I'm sorry, who else? Go ahead.
No, that was me trailing off. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm going to be called into the bedtime routine at some point here, so I'm trying to get as much as we can out of everyone's time. Okay, so you're saying that there is a requirement included already for street trees for new developments, right?
Right.
Is the language specific enough to our liking, or is it aggressive enough to our liking? Does it say what we should or should do, or does it just say put a tree every 25 feet down the sidewalk?
I believe there's some specifics to it, because kind of the idea is you want street trees, they need to be spaced appropriately, and they also need to be tall enough to where if you're walking down the street, you're not going to walk into a branch.
Sure.
So I think there is some specifics baked into it. And again, I'll take a look. And that's also like all in coordination, again, with like your guys' recommendations is helpful.
Yep.
And then like transportation, mobility, and parking, who obviously want to, make walking a really enjoyable experience, as opposed to, being crammed up against a sidewalk in a building and having cars flying by you.
Sweet. Okay, so shading parking lots, yes or no? We've got regulations in there now, or language in there now.
I believe there's language in there now, and I will double check on that.
Native trees, not more
Right.
ginkgo. That is.
Right.
Well, there's native. Is there anything in there? I was going to ask about the landscaping. Is there anything about invasive?
I don't think anything talks about invasive. It might be a good. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that calls out invasive trees in there.
And Heather, how do you feel about native or adaptive? Because that's like
Yeah,
how
I'm fine
we-
with, as long as it's not invasive, surely I think if non-native, native is so dependent on your definition of when it was brought here or from here or whatever it is, but there's right now down by, the Maritime by us, right? It's just lined with ginkgo trees that
Yeah.
are certainly not from and
No.
have some effects. So
Okay. All right, so we're on the landscaping now. So we said native is in there, suggest adding adaptive. Definitely add no invasive.
And I believe the reg, it specifies some sort of like tree guideline. I'll take a look at what the guideline says.
Okay. All right, so now as far as tree removal goes, right now we've got sort of like clear cutting is like 5,000 square feet, right? Is the level of entry for,
Right now, we don't say anything. So the proposed regs, so like the existing regulations.
oh, I'm sorry,
Oh.
in the proposed.
Yes, yeah, so 5,000 becomes the trigger. So 5,000 to 10,000, you'll need a zoning permit. So you have to submit a soil and erosion control plan. You have to submit a bond for those soil and erosion controls. And then when you get over 10,000, you get a special permit. So you'd have to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and special permits are intentionally give the Planning and Zoning Commission discretion. So you kind of have to make a pretty good point on why you're clear cutting 10,000 square feet and how that's not detrimental to the health and welfare of the community. In which case it might be pretty difficult to do that.
Well, let me throw something at you. What is the average lot size in a CD3 zone?
So CD3 today, so again, a combination of the B and C residents. Minimum lot size in the B zone is 6,250 square feet, and a C zone is about 5,000 square feet. So you'd have to take like two of those lots and clear cut them.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if 5,000 is too generous.
It very well could be. So if that number comes down, I don't think you're gonna see a big opposition to that number being reduced.
Well, don't count your chickens.
At least
before they
from
hatch.
me, at least from me.
Yeah, this is
I mean,
being
I would
recorded, by the way,
recommend
Brian Baker. What's that?
lowering that, because you wind up in the smaller lot residential zones where, with all the development going on, like just all the trees have come down.
Yeah, we can, it might make sense to scale it based on either reduce the number entirely, or you scale it based on
To a percentage with a cap or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Like 10% of lot area, which for me would be 500 square feet for a 50 by 100 lot. How much is that? 50 square feet is like 6 by 8. No, that wouldn't work. 50% of a lot? I don't know. I'm just throwing numbers out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
it might be, I don't know if you do it the bigger percentage for the smaller lots and the lower percentage for the bigger lots, something like that.
okay.
We can look.
All right. Yeah, we're just spitballing here. I dig that you're into it though.
does
it.
one last question. Sorry. I know I said I would be quiet, but I find that very difficult. Quick question on, I don't know if this is in a different article, but we have a lot of what I would call, brownfields in Norwalk, and I don't know if that's technically what they are, right? I don't know if the zoning addresses the reuse of them and or the implications for the reuse. In other words, where that waste goes, how it's cleaned up. I know that a lot of it is covered under sort of like EPA sort of guidance and all of that about, but in my mind, I don't know if it belongs in here. I just don't know if it was addressed at all, or if I guess that's a question. Does it belong? Do there need to be some sort of discussion, or is it included, or where does that lie?
Yeah, so there's nothing in the proposed regs that discuss brownfield remediation. And like you said, I think it's mostly because it gets dealt with a lot through EPA and DEP.
Yeah.
So I don't know like what a zoning regulation can, whether we want to like incentivize certain things on
That's what I was going to ask. Would you incentivize
That's
it?
kind of what I was thinking along the lines of, instead of like the clearing things, let's.
Yeah, the hard part is zoning statutorily has it has to be like uniform through the uniformity clause. It has to apply like throughout the zone, the same to all properties. So if you add in something about a brownfield, it might like it sort of, I don't know if it breaks. I'm not an attorney, but I don't know if it could be codified or not.
Understood.
It sounds
Okay.
like you would almost need to identify if we did have an area with lots of sites that were like, big parking lots that used to be lead factories or brass factories 200 years ago or whatever. You would almost have to have like a zone specifically for that.
Right. That's where like an
Wait.
overlay could be really interesting. Like you could say
An
like, yeah.
brownfield overlay. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Thank
All right,
you.
that's a good question though. Sorry. Anyone else? I had another one here, urban air quality. So a lot of these things overlap, right? So urban air quality to me overlaps with trees, landscaping, not so much with water. It does maybe overlap with, I think, transit
Mhm.
and buildings. I know there's lots of, yeah, I'll stop there. So does anybody have any thoughts on urban air quality? No? Okay, that's fine. Crickets.
Seems particularly topical.
Well, right, I know. I should show you guys a picture. I changed my ERV filter this morning, our ventilation system, and there's literally chunks on the fresh air filter that's coming into our house. It's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna share the picture while we're out being recorded, but it's insane. So yeah, I think like trees again. What else can we do with that, folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the big goals of the regulations themselves, and then just like the city developing going forward into the future is focusing development in a way that you don't necessarily need a car for every trip.
Right.
I mean, cars are the biggest greenhouse gas contributor, so it's if we could get to an area where we've reduced the actual amount of vehicle miles traveled, I think that takes helps out a lot.
I was gonna actually, thank you for saying that. Ped malls, like I lived in Iowa City for years. I love Madison, Wisconsin, all these places where they have streets that they turned into pedestrian malls and they're tree lined and well, Ithaca's got a ped mall too, I think maybe. But anyway, we don't really have much of that in Norwalk. I guess we've got the new Waypoint or whatever with where Colony Grill is now. That's sort of a ped mall. I think we've got Ironworks at the end of Washington Street with the fountain turnaround. That's sort of a ped mall. I don't know. Do we have any other of those? Is there a place for that type of thing? And is this the place to consider it or not? Or is this a
Yeah,
timing concern?
it depends on like how you just like we can put in the ability for it to be provided as part of like a private development. But like if you wanted to do that on a public street, then it's probably better under like TMP and looking at like complete streets or kind of their road standards and guidelines. So it kind of depends on, is it a privately provided one or is it a publicly provided one?
Okay, all right. So probably not much for us to do there.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the air quality, I mean, some of it comes back to some of the systems and cycles. Like it doesn't help to have dead zones, and some of that is linked to over-fertilization, the nitrates, the pollutants that go into the water. Because I mean, we need plankton and we don't need dead zones in the sound because most of the oxygen levels are tapering off if you follow like the Scripps curves and looking at the CO2, which is now at all-time record high in the atmosphere and things. So, all these systemic things, which are like kind of more not accessible, I think, to the layperson to see systematically how all these things kind of impact the overall environment, but it's really important over time.
Okay, all right, well, this is awesome. I've got two big things. I've got three big things typed out here. I've got water management. And I'd be curious to know, Brian, how aggressive you really think we could get with that. I mean, like, could we keep all surface water on the surface and not in the sound in the city of Norwalk. You know, like, that's crazy. I understand that. But is that something to keep in mind as like, well, what if, you know, what would it take to get us there? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And
so-
and again, is this the right time? Is this the right venue? Or is that something else?
Yeah, so what we do, like say a new development comes in and they want to, and most of the development that we see in Norwalk is infill development, or it's a reuse of an existing property.
Right.
They come in, they apply for the permit to build whatever they want to build. They submit their utility plans, and that all gets reviewed through DPW, and they have like their drainage manual. And I believe what they require is that all systems are designed for a 25-year rainfall event. So like all of that rain needs to be stored on the property. So I think if like you wanted to bulk it up, it might be, I'm not sure if putting it into the zoning reg makes the best sense, or if it makes more sense to go through DPW, just because if you want to bulk it up through DPW, it's less of a, like, we need to change our entire zoning regulation bureaucratic process, and it could kind of might be like a quicker fix through DPW. But again, I'm not sure if which is best.
No, that makes a lot more sense. I think actually maybe that's one we'll keep folks on the Conservation Commission list of priorities, but not applied here for the zoning rewrite. Because yeah, that makes sense to me. It's not really a land use thing in essence. Okay. So we've got water management. There's questions about you know, how much water can we really keep on a site? There's the and I think the things like swales, things like what they did at the Webster, what's the behind 50 Washington, Webster Street lot.
Mhm.
I saw that and I was like, whose idea was that? This is such a good idea. And it, you know, like it's relatively easy to do. And, you know, so anyway, we've got water management, we've got landscaping, we've got heat island effect. Those are the big ones. As far as marching orders for Brian or feedback for Brian. Not marching orders. Marching orders for us to get that information over to him in some sort of memo. Who wants to volunteer to help with that? Amelia smirks because this is one memo she doesn't have to write. No? All right. Well, we'll see. Transit. Are you going to tell me probably, Brian, that this is not the best place to address things like bike lanes and such?
Yeah, that's all. I mean, so the original proposal that the consultant had give us for the zoning regulations included a bunch of stuff on like that for they called them like development parcels, which are big, like they were at the time 10 acres. Then we went down to 7.5 acres, which included all sort of like road design stuff. We thought it was better to just reference TMP's complete streets guidelines and all that kind of stuff. So like if you're going to build a new road, it's going to say, go see the TMP guidelines, because they're going to tell you how to build a road. And those are going to include all sort of your minimum width for sidewalks, your bike lanes, street trees, all those kind of things.
Okay.
And again, that's because we didn't want, one, for our regulations to conflict with TMP's standards, and two, we didn't want, if standards start to change, that we then would have to change the
Get out of whack.
regulations. Yeah.
What's TMP?
Transportation, mobility, and parking.
Okay.
They're a department in the city, and they've been doing a lot of those like road designs, like the Wall Street stuff and all that kind of stuff.
Transit. Yep. Okay, cool. All right. Well, we're coming up on an hour and a half. Does anybody have anything else they want to ask Brian or throw out there for us all to chew on? Okay. Brian, I would say thanks on behalf of all of us.
All right, I just thought I hadn't mentioned this, but it had, I don't know if the people who are running with the climate resiliency zone project, there had been discussion about a climate resiliency overlay, because there's some specific things I think that are probably going to come out of that assessment, and looking at things that they'd like to recommend for the zones that they're looking at for the climate resiliency areas. So I just want-
Who is
I
this?
just wanted to flag that.
Who is this? Who's working on the climate
It's-
resiliency?
Like Circa through Yukon.
Circa, yeah, through Yukon. So they're coming up with certain recommendations, I think, as a, as part of for the town of Norwalk, so.
Oh, right.
And they, they'd flag that maybe there might be that there could be an opportunity, or one of the recommendations would be, because there's some specific things for those zones going forward.
Yeah, so a lot of those recommendations we'll take a look at, and then those we can, what'll happen is we'll likely take those recommendations and then apply it into the zoning regulations, kind of take what they're saying and say, all right, let's put this, how do we take their recommendations and codify it within our regulations to take those into account.
So you will be considering Yukon suggestions for resiliency with regard to the Circa.
Yeah, it was mostly focused, I think, on like the Water Street area, with all the flooding that always goes on down there.
Okay.
So they're kind of looking at like best practices going forward, like how should the city kind of sort of work around that or solve it.
Okay. So, all right, if nobody else has any thoughts or anything, I guess I will just sort of follow up with an email to you all. And I think maybe if Brian's on the email list, we'll get you on there. If not, Alexis will bring you in the loop.
Yeah, and I'll try to get all those questions that I didn't have answers for tonight, answers.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I need a motion to adjourn, please.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I'll second.
I should write this down because we'll need it in minutes, won't we?
Are you the secretary as well?
I'm taking minutes tonight, so you are all set with that. You don't have to
Oh,
worry.
Amelia did. Oh, that's right.
Wow.
Awesome. Thanks, Amelia. Okay, any discussion? All in favor, aye. I don't think anyone not voted, so unanimous. Okay, good night, everybody.
All right,
Nice to
good
see you.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.